Stars in Time is an indie project made by Insert Disc 5. She/they, that was my pronoun joke, I hope you like it, are an animator and cartoonist, but more importantly, queer. The game itself is inspired by the classical JRPG format, mixes in some time looping, then spends that time emotionally devastating the player. The first thing you're shown is a dramatic piece of symbology, which is unintelligible for about 20 hours of game time. You play as Sifrin. First you're introduced to Mirabelle. She tells you to talk to your allies about a sleepover at a clock tower and some other nonsense. She gives you a note due to Sifrin's poor memory, so you do that. In doing so, you get to ask them a handful of questions and learn a lot about their personalities. Bonnie's a hyperactive kid, Odile's a smart older lady, Mirabelle's comically insecure, very outward about it, and fucking adorable. Isabu's a boisterous bro, fostering a crush on the protagonist. You're forced to interact with the statue of this culture's god, the Change God, which shows a cutscene containing an entire game's worth of story. The king took over the House of Change in Dormont and then began to freeze the country in time. Mira escaped with a blessing and became the Chosen One. She went around, met this Team 5 Ord's big door you've seen in RPG before. Today is the last, and tomorrow is the end. So when Sif goes to ask a favor from the local big tree, as instructed, he wishes for something small, utterly inconsequential. Before we leave Dormont, I want to point out some things you can do here. Go fish, meet a fan, talk to a lesbian. If you poke around the library, you can find a book saying, you should not be able to craft time, and one in a language you cannot read. There's a handful of souvenirs you can find. Several copies of Percy Chateau Castle are lying around. After all this, you go to the clock tower. Bonnie's made dinner, Mira is sad, Issa comforts her, Sif and Odile don't join the group hug, Issa attempts to confess something to Sif. All of this information, this characterization is a setup. Percy Chateau Castle is an in-world episodic book series that Mira likes. It becomes a running joke, then it becomes a side quest, and then it makes a definitive statement about Mira and her anxiety with the Chosen One label that has been foisted upon her. You see more things written in a language you cannot read, ones that give you a headache just looking at it, names that give you a headache just thinking about it. Timecraft and how to do it is a central piece of lore. You'll be waiting for that confession. Sif's poor memory and general touch aversion is a core element of his character and the narrative. Who these people are and Sif's relationship with them is the driving force of the story. This comes in subtler forms. You will glance over the most important line of text in the entire canon without realizing. You must talk with all your teammates. You don't have to tell them about the clock tower, but you do have to ask them what they're doing after. Sif never asks that question again. After the clock tower, you enter the house and get a combat tutorial. But first I want to note the framing. Mirabelle and her team are supposed to be experienced adventurers nearing the end of their epic RPG, just before the final boss. Logically, they should know what they're doing, how to operate as a team, how to fight baddies, but the player needs to be told explicitly how to do that. Doing this well keeps players engaged. Doing it poorly causes refunds. This often comes in the form of a naive or amnesiac protagonist that self-justifies simplistic explanations, which doesn't work here. The solution is to frame it as an extension of Mirabelle's anxiety, one of the few things that's guaranteed the player knows about her. Odile's instructions serve both as dry tutorialization and vivid characterization as everybody bounces off of it. Sif being quizzed is a joke and a way of ensuring player knowledge. Later on, you can do this again if you want, and that opens the door for a variety of great moments. Turn-based RPGs have become, unfortunately, a bit of a niche genre. Ignoring cultural trends, there's genuine critiques we can make for this style of combat. All combat, in all games, is ultimately a question of numbers. Turn-based strategy feels like numbers. Good play requires doing math. How players engage with the numbers, how they make plans, execute them, react to RNG, how the mechanics enforce, encourage, or disincentivize certain plans, certain executions. That's how the developer creates a dialogue with the player. There's an ideal form of interaction here. Developers create complex problems in the form of encounters and bosses, then players create complex solutions in the form of a planned sequence of events, which is then spiced with randomness. At its worst, the players ignore all nuance in favor of forcing the numbers into place. Turn their brain off and mash A, stuff their inventory full of healing items or forget that items exist, performing free sources of health and mana. When reduced entirely to numbers, the devs have failed to engage the player. Arguably, the player fails the devs when they spend 5 hours grinding, but developers know that. Optimizing away the fun is a mainstay of the hobby. If the structure encourages unwanted behavior, it's the game's fault for rewarding it. That being said, we can't pretend the tropes of the genre don't create these issues. They're inherent to the thing itself, so since the NES, devs have been experimenting. The Mario RPG have action commands, which rewards attentive and skilled players with extra damage dealt and less taken and something extra in the Paper Marios. The more recent Sea of Stars copies action commands, as more games should. I forgot to record audio for this section. Pew, choo, 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 choo. And changes up mana. Instead of a larger pool refilled primarily by items and respites, it's a small pool. Those items are more rare and limited. Mana is refilled by smacking dudes with the basic attack, so the player can be thinking multiple smaller fights or several turns in advance as they spend and regenerate mana. Not only is this integral to the lock and break mechanic and the combo system, but it gives utility to basic attacks, which struggle to remain relevant when the player has powerful skills and spells at their disposal. I promise this is relevant, but first, craft. It's the resonant magic system. Rather than being comparable to rock, paper, scissors, it just is. Craft uses are one of the above. I'm sure you can guess resistances and weaknesses, but I'll point out that types are neutral against their own. You can tell an opponent's type by hand position. It's readable, and some enemies of the same type can switch up their types. Speed is finally a meaningful stat. Everybody has a counter that ticks down simultaneously, with turn order being something you can track visually. There's no mana. The limitation on skill use is cooldowns. Henceforth, there's no reason not to use them in smaller fights, and should add a bit of planning to longer fights. Basic attacks then remain relevant by having craft types, giving an interplay with the jackpot. Those symbols on the side track your last 5 attacks. If they're all the same, your team unleashes an all-out, basically. It deals major group damage of said type and revives KO teammates, and gives a near full heal, and clears status effects. It's kind of powerful. In order to stack a type, you can only use that type, which opens the opportunity to use buffs, all of which are team buffs, pass a turn with Sifra Isa's skill, use an item, heal, etc. Making plans is fairly simple, so it's done very quickly, with actions being cued by gauges as something you're actively aware of and responding to. If you know how, you gun for a jackpot in round 1. If you pass intelligently, you can get an extra turn from a more situationally powerful character. Very few fights last longer than 2 rounds, if you're gunning for jackpots, which also means that you leave every fight at full health. These systems are damn good, but I checked out almost immediately. 3 types is too few. I never paid attention to cooldowns. Immediately readable enemy types is very cool, but no memorization is required. Pardon the 2 unreadable opponents. Items are just useless. Like, you could use a tonic to heal, or you could attack and get a jackpot. You could use Isa's turn to buff with a spice, but Isa has a defense buffing skill. Or he could pass and give, guess what, a jackpot. Salty Procs lower cooldowns, utility mostly unique to them, but I've only used them in one extremely specific situation wherein I require a specific skill right now. Jackpots are so powerful, it's better to waste a turn than to ruin a jackpot. When Odil's only rock or scissors type attack and debuff are on cooldown, it's best to guard, to do literally nothing. The game is highly limited, more so than average. For example, the balance of the entire combat system biases towards whatever type the final boss is. He's par none the most demanding fight in the game, and the dev is fully aware of this. Odil's level 49 skill is a strong single target paper type move. The one pair of gloves you find for Isa changes his basic attack to a paper type. Most of Sif's later skills interact primarily with the jackpot system, giving double points of a given type or not giving any. There's several equipable memories meant to give the player an edge, but are completely useless. Avoiding spoilers, every skill gained from leveling comes with a memory of said skill. While those are useful, it's barely worth menuing for, let alone giving up a +5 or +30 to all stats. There's a whole quest involving piecing together a bomb that requires grabbing an item in Dorma and 2 more on the 3rd floor for a free 3,000 damage on the king, but you can do more than that in a single turn anyways. The only reason to grab it is to make Bonnie and Odile happy. Jackpots being overpowered makes sense in the context of this game. If they were more balanced, this combat could easily be scaled to a Dragon Quest type world-spanning adventure and easily outclass those combat systems. Whatever Schlut Squeenix is pushing out just doesn't compare. Dragon Quest XI is a great example of a game that's fine. Its actual combat is standard, but it creates depth by having a wider variety of characters and specializations for those characters. Sea of Stars has amazing combat that's held back by an absolute slog of a story. And of course, TTYD is the greatest thing since women started fucking. Fucking. Past the tutorial hallways is a subtler form of tutorialization. You enter a room, the path straight ahead is blocked by a locked door, to the left is a key, to the right is a handful of items and a souvenir. This flow, go left, go right, get the keys, is the entire dungeon in a nutshell. It is a straight line you branch off of with a handful of optional areas and various pickups. The end of every floor contains a mini-boss, then a snack room, then a foyer. It's lazy, uninspired, and boring. Is what I would say for literally any other game in this genre. There's a unique relationship fostered with the space that trivializes the layout of the dungeon itself. A well-crafted puzzle box would be more enjoyable, but that's not the point. Past the locked door, Sifrin fucking dies, and we're introduced to loops. Classic timey-wimey shenanigans. I will not elaborate. Repeating the same events over and over again is really tedious, so multiple mechanics exist in order to streamline that process. Sif retains levels, XP, and most equipment. Equipable memories are never forgotten, and some of these are actually helpful, particularly past the midpoint. Zoning out allows the player to speed through conversations they've already had and stops when something is new. Would you still be my buddy if I was a worm? Dying or similar allows you to go back to Dormont or forward to floor 3 or back to floor 1 but with all the keys. You can loop back and forth almost freely. This is very convenient and cuts down on tedium if you know what you want to do. That almost comes in the form of spending memories gained from fights in order to loop forwards. It can cost anywhere from 5 to 30 of these guys. This seems like an arbitrary restriction, but you'll typically have multiple things to do. You know, a given loop, and by having to spend a resource, it encourages the player to write out a path and leads them to various things that do change. It's genuinely good. It's frustrating, but it's good game design. The power of repetition is where the game achieves a majority of its emotional meaning. The house is not a dungeon you play through, it's waking up and brushing your teeth, it's combining that with brewing coffee. Everything stays the same, but is constantly changing. Externals do this in a small way, while Sifrin's all over the fucking place. It's like some type of gay metaphor. This is also when we meet Loop. They function as a kind of guide and comrade. Their consciousness also transcends the Loopies, and so they're the only person that Sif can talk to. This goober is impossible to talk about in detail. There's a single piece of information you may or may not find in the epilogue that recontextualizes everything they say. How they introduce themselves is a perfect segue. This one scene is a bit odd. It's out of place compared to how the rest of the game handles the topic of gender. What we call queerness is seminal in the text. The culture of this world does not have those constructions. This shifts the focus from the politicized versions of our identities permitted under cis heteronormativity to the experience of the body that actually constitutes our internal realities. I do not wish to make a representation argument, but this video game does it better. There are two contrasting versions of asexuality here, and while my knowledge on the subject comes almost entirely from the Ace Couples podcast,
hello everyone, and
therefore my opinion doesn't matter, these are even-handed and accurate portrayals, in my opinion. Mirabelle's struggle comes primarily from her need to conform to the expectations of Faith, and somehow she's the platonic ideal of the squish. Sifrin being aloe ace is not my reading, and that's for reasons, but I'm not making that argument, and I don't want to take this away from people. If you poke around on the associated Discord, it's obvious who's latched onto him and why, and they should get to keep him. Issa's trans identity is something I do get to have an opinion on. It was really good, I like it. Deconstructing the essentialist paradigm and one's relation to it is intellectually and emotionally difficult. It's self-evident the writer has put in the legwork and has a mature perspective. Understanding that culture creates a problem and calls it queer. So culture is what needs to be shaped by and for the queer. It's not even the central thesis, it's just world building. Though I think it's what a lot of people, particularly younger, are going to walk away with. It's impossible not to pay attention to, considering how the real world treats ace, non-binary, trans men. It's the ultimate gamer fantasy, really. Obviously, it's difficult to express the cumulative feel of the writing in video format. The player is thoroughly rooted in cis head and privy to the thoughts they refuse to express. This causes a kind of synchronization, player and player character becoming emotionally entwined through that ludonarrative practice. When beats happen, they hit. It works. This creates an unstated premise that you need that connection to partake in the work. When the emotion is organic, it's magic. If it's artificial, then the game is so fucking boring, oh my god. On the more technical side is the use of foreshadowing. The game is constantly giving you new information to justify your willful torment. The vast majority ties into later elements of the plot. What isn't foreshadowing is either a piece of world building or a reminder. This brings a texture to the world and characters. It asks you to pay attention and gives you a reason. This is reinforced by the prose, which are either succinctly humorous, grim, or both. I want to dig into the romance subplot. Issa is something of a himbo and cis little bean, a match made in heaven. This kind of tentative when will they is set up immediately. The bear is extremely emotionally aware. He often reads Sif faster than Sif reads themselves. He's very careful not to upset Sif, not because it's advantageous for his sexual conquest, but because he values their comfort. His reticence for confession is both a result of internal devaluation and an extension of protecting Sif. Later, it's stated that the dumb guy routine is entirely artificial, but you can pick up on how intelligent he actually is through his actions almost immediately. Sif is no fool either. He's well aware of Issa's feelings and reciprocates them, but they're emotionally capable of processing those feelings. Issa's hot, so he has to do it. They need different things, but they want each other. Characters are the focus, and he creates conflict, and it's appropriately pushed off to the side. It's a great romance subplot that's coincidentally queer, which means it's amazing. Frankly, it's the only one I've ever given a shit about. I can't exactly unpour a beer, so I kind of have to get this right. But what's it actually about, huh? This is the internet. We won. And it's full of trauma. It's a story about reconciling childhood trauma in the face of adult adversity. The king and Sif are both survivors of a vague cataclysm which erased their country of origin from the world, from the map, from memory. The king cannot let go. Sif is learning why. The rules are enforced by a lost form of craft, but it functions like the real thing, and what I mean by that is Sif has amnesia like I have amnesia. Let that simmer for dramatic effect. We construct a sense of self in regards to our memories, and when those are gone, it always comes so naturally. You know the truth, you know what happened, but you can't remember. You need to, but you can't. You want to, but you can't. And right now, maybe you kind of do, but you can't. We construct a sense of self, and we construct a sense of self in regards to our memories. It always comes so naturally. You know the truth, you know what happened, but you can't remember. And you want to, but you can't. And you have to, but you can't. And right now, maybe you kind of do, but you can't. I don't feel like me. My entire personality functions as an act of mimicry. I feel like a cheap imitation of those I aspire towards. I don't think I'm capable of making the things I want to. I don't think I deserve it. I am not the person who can make Sergeant Kindness great. I'm not Harrington Splendid. I'm not able to give this art the love it deserves. But I can make 17 minutes or whatever the fuck this is. I can recognize that making things is a skill that I don't have, and that I'm allowed to be bad at something, and that I'm good enough. I totally believe that. I kind of do. If you repeat it enough times, you start to believe it. And I wish that I could tell you that what I just did is what this game does, is healing, is everything, and make it right and make it good, and not spend 6 minutes on combat. Somehow this game took 5 years of shit and did it right, did it good. Sif's too afraid to ask for touch. I'm making it a point. This was a lot more painful when I wrote it. It's still kind of painful, not really. It's like, kind of, like, but it was a lot more, it was, writing is inherently an act of processing. That's right, a 20-something-year-old is positing about art again. And I'm not magically able to make the arguments I want to. I just want to shove a paragraph in there that says the things that it needs to say. Some gay shit made in RPG Maker changed my fucking life, okay?